The last rays of sunset bathed the desert in crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Elena Cortez stood at the entrance of her small adobe home, her weathered Winchester rifle steady in her hands, watching as figures emerged from the shimmering heat on the horizon. 12 Apache warriors approached in solemn procession, their faces painted with symbols of power and protection, adorned with eagle feathers and turquoise that caught the fading light. At their center rode a towering figure draped in a ceremonial blanket of intricate design, his penetrating gaze fixed directly on her modest homestead. The warriors halted in perfect formation when he raised his hand. The silence that followed seemed to make the very air tremble with anticipation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had not always lived alone in this harsh borderland between worlds. 3 years ago, she had been Elena Martinez, wife to Ricardo and schoolteacher to the children of Cielo Rojo, the small settlement that had sprung up around the silver mining operations in the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains. Their life had been simple but fulfilling until the raid that changed everything. Whether it was bandits or renegades hardly mattered in the end. The flames had claimed both her husband and their dreams, leaving behind only ash, grief, and the scarred woman who now carried her maiden name again. The scar that ran from her left temple down her cheek pulled slightly at her smile, a permanent reminder of the night that had redefined her existence. Most people in the nearest town of Agua Clara couldn't hide their discomfort when they saw her disfigurement, their eyes sliding away as if her misfortune might somehow be contagious. Only the elderly Navajo medicine woman, who occasionally traded herbs at the general store, had ever looked directly at Elena's scarred face without flinching, commenting once that some wounds were meant to be seen, for they marked those who had survived what should have killed them. Elena had rebuilt her life in this isolated spot, a small homestead nestled against the foothills, far enough from Agua Clara to avoid the whispers and stares, yet close enough to trade her handcrafted leather goods and herbal remedies for necessary supplies. The land here was unforgiving rocky soil that grudgingly yielded vegetables only after backbreaking labor, searing summer heat that baked the earth to dusty hardness, and winter nights cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs. Yet there was beauty here too. Magnificent sunrises that set the mountains ablaze with light, night skies so vast and star-filled they made the heart ache with their splendor, and an untamed freedom that Elena had come to treasure. Here, the land didn't judge her scarred face, or question her right to survive alone. It simply demanded respect and hard work, both of which she could provide. She had established routines that anchored her days, rising before dawn to tend her small herd of goats and the sturdy mule that was her primary means of transportation, gathering herbs from the foothills while the morning air was still cool, spending afternoons crafting leather goods or preparing tinctures and salves that had earned her a quiet reputation as a skilled healer among those willing to travel to her remote homestead. In the evenings, she would sit on her porch, watching the desert transform under the setting sun, her father's old Winchester always within reach, not out of fear, but practical necessity in a land where coyotes, mountain lions, and occasionally desperate men posed very real threats. The isolation had become her companion, the silence a balm to her wounded spirit. If she sometimes spoke aloud to the goats or sang to herself while working, it was simply to remember the sound of a human voice. If she kept a small wooden carving of a bird that Ricardo had made for her on her bedside table, touching it each night before sleep claimed her, it was her own private ritual of remembrance, witnessed only by the desert night. 4 years of solitude had taught Elena to read the land and sky like others read books. She knew a storm was approaching long before the clouds gathered, recognized the subtle shifts in animal behavior that signaled danger, and could trap game with a skill That would have impressed even the native hunters who occasionally passed through these territories. These abilities weren't innate gifts but hard-won knowledge, each lesson carved into memory through necessity and sometimes pain. The storm that swept across the desert that fateful evening had been building for days. Elena had secured her animals. In the stone shelter she'd constructed for such weather, harvested what vegetables might be damaged by the coming deluge, and ensured her water barrels were positioned to capture the precious rainfall. The first heavy drops had just begun to fall when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the approaching storm. A high, frightened cry, barely audible above the rising wind. Elena paused in the doorway of her home, head tilted as she listened. Perhaps it was merely a desert fox or some other creature seeking shelter. The cry came again, distinctly human this time, young and terrified. Without hesitation, Elena grabbed her rifle and a lantern, stepping out into the gathering storm. The rain was falling harder now, driven sideways by gusts of wind that tore at her clothing and threatened to extinguish the protected flame of her lantern. She followed the sound around the corner of her home toward the small arroyo that ran along the eastern edge of her property. In the dim light, she could make out movement near the brush-choked drainage, something thrashing in desperate panic. Elena approached cautiously, rifle ready, lantern held high to cast its glow farther into the darkness. What she saw froze her in place for one stunned moment. A young boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, had been cornered against the steep bank of the arroyo by 3 snarling rain-soaked wolves. The child was attempting to fend them off with a broken branch, but his movements were hampered by what appeared to be an injury to his leg. Even in the poor light, Elena could see that his clothing was not that of a settler's child. He wore a breechcloth and moccasins, his small body painted with faint ceremonial markings, now mostly washed away by the rain. His long black hair hung in wet ropes around a face contorted with fear and determination. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Apache. The realization should have given her pause. Relations between settlers and the Apache bands had deteriorated dramatically in recent months. Rumors of attacks on isolated homesteads spread through Agua Clara like wildfire, with each telling growing more terrifying than the last. The army had established Fort Braverman 20 miles south, supposedly for the protection of settlers, though most knew it was primarily to monitor Apache movements as more white settlers pushed into traditional hunting grounds. But Elena didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The wolves turned at the sound, their yellow eyes reflecting the lantern light as they assessed this new threat. The largest of the 3, clearly the leader, took a step toward Elena, lips pulled back to reveal gleaming fangs. She leveled the rifle directly at the creature, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Go on," she said firmly, as if the beast could understand her words. "Find easier prey elsewhere." For a tense moment, predator and human locked eyes in the driving rain. Then Elena fired again, the bullet striking the ground near the wolf's feet. This was enough to convince the pack that their intended meal wasn't worth the risk. They retreated, melting into the darkness beyond the lantern's reach with reluctant growls. Elena approached the boy carefully, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. He had pressed himself against the arroyo wall, the broken branch still clutched in his small hands, now raised defensively against this new potential threat. His dark eyes, wide with fear and pain, never left her face. "It's all right," Elena said softly, setting the rifle down and raising her empty palms in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I won't hurt you." The boy said something in Apache, a stream of words that meant nothing to her. His voice was tight with pain, and in the lantern light, Elena could now see the reason. A deep gash ran along his right thigh, bleeding steadily despite the crude bandage wrapped around it. The wound was fresh, the child obviously in agony. For one suspended moment, Elena stood frozen in the rain, the logical choice warring with the one her heart had already made. The logical choice, the safe choice would be to leave him, perhaps alert the army patrol that occasionally passed by her property. An Apache child this far from his people meant trouble, the kind that could get a lone woman killed. But as she looked at his small form, another image superimposed itself, Ricardo cradling their stillborn son, tears streaming down his face as he whispered prayers in Spanish. The child they had dreamed of but never had the chance to raise, the memory made her decision for her. Elena set the lantern on a flat stone and knelt beside the boy. "I want to help you," she said, knowing he couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would convey her intent. She pointed to his injured leg, then to herself, and finally made a wrapping motion around her own thigh. The boy watched her warily, his body trembling from cold, fear, and likely shock from his injury. After a long moment, he lowered the branch slightly, though his posture remained tense, ready to defend himself if necessary. Taking this as permission, Elena moved closer, examining the wound as best she could in the limited light. The gash was deep but clean, likely caused by a sharp edge of rock rather than an animal attack. It needed proper cleaning and stitching to prevent infection. The weather was worsening by the minute, thunder now crashing overhead as lightning split the sky in brilliant forks. "We need to get you inside," Elena said, gesturing toward her home, visible as a dim shape through the curtain of rain. "Can you walk?" The boy attempted to stand but collapsed with a cry of pain when he put weight on his injured leg. Without further hesitation, Elena extinguished the lantern and picked him up. He was surprisingly light, his small body burning with fever beneath his rain-soaked skin. He made no sound as she carried him toward the house, but she could feel his heart racing against her chest, a frightened bird seeking escape. Inside, Elena quickly bolted the door against the storm and laid the boy on her narrow bed. His eyes darted around the small one-room adobe, taking in every detail with the hyper-vigilance of one accustomed to danger. When she moved toward her medicine cabinet, he tried to sit up, his face pale with effort. "No," Elena said firmly, gently pressing him back onto the bed. "You need to rest." She gathered clean cloths, her small medical kit of surgical needles and silk thread, and a pot of water to heat over the fire. As the storm raged outside, rattling the shutters and sending occasional gusts of wind down the chimney, Elena set about treating the boy's wound. He watched her every move, tense and alert despite his obvious exhaustion and pain. When she reached for the crude bandage on his leg, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. They stared at each other, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Understanding dawned on Elena. Trust would not come easily, not from an Apache child to a white woman. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing the twisted burn scars that covered her right forearm, another permanent reminder of the fire that had claimed her husband. "We all carry our wounds," she said quietly. Something shifted in the boy's expression, not quite trust, but perhaps recognition. He released her wrist, allowing her to turn her attention to his injury. The wound was worse than she had initially thought. The gash ran from just above his knee halfway down his calf, the edges ragged and inflamed. Without treatment, infection would claim him within days. Working methodically, Elena cleaned the wound, applying a poultice of herbs she had learned to use from the Navajo medicine woman, and then carefully stitched the deepest portions closed with tiny, even sutures. Throughout the process, the boy remained stoically silent, though she could feel him trembling beneath her hands. Only when she secured the final bandage did he relax slightly, his body surrendering to the exhaustion that had been held at bay by fear and pain. Elena offered him a cup of water, which he accepted after a moment's hesitation. His eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that felt older than his years. She wondered what circumstances had led him to be alone in a storm, separated from his people, pursued by wolves. "What's your name?" she asked, touching her chest. "I'm Elena." The boy blinked, perhaps understanding the question if not the specific words. After a long pause, he touched his own chest. "Nilchi," he said, his voice stronger than she had expected. "Nilchi," Elena repeated, testing the name. The boy nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his face in her pronunciation. Night deepened. As the storm continued to rage, Elena made a pallet for herself near the hearth, allowing Nilchi to keep the bed. She knew sleep would elude her. The presence of the child had upset the careful balance of her isolation. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions. The army would consider her harboring an Indian child regardless of his age, and the people of Agua Clara would be quick to condemn her if they discovered her actions. Yet, as she watched Nilchi finally succumb to exhaustion, his small chest rising and falling in the flickering firelight, Elena felt something stir within her that she had thought long dead, fierce protectiveness, a determination that no more harm would come to this child if she could prevent it. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a hushed stillness broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves. Elena stoked the fire one last time before settling onto her makeshift bed. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered to the sleeping child. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that her decision to shelter one lost Apache boy would soon bring his war chief uncle to her doorstep with sacred marriage. Vows at sunset. Morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through the small windows of Elena's adobe home. She woke instantly, years of solitude having sharpened her senses to any change in her environment. She looked immediately to the bed, half expecting to find it empty, the boy having fled during the night. But Nilchi was still there, propped up against the wall, watching her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. The fever had broken sometime during the night, leaving his face less flushed, but still drawn with pain. Elena rose from her pallet, wincing slightly as her muscles protested the uncomfortable night on the floor. "Good morning," she said, moving to check on the fire. "Are you hungry?" Nilchi didn't respond verbally, but his gaze followed her as she moved about the small space, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge sweetened with honey from the wild bees she had discovered in the foothills last summer. She placed a bowl within his reach, demonstrating how to eat it by taking a spoonful of her own portion. After a moment's hesitation, hunger won out over suspicion, and Nilchi began to eat. Elena sat at her small table, giving him space while considering her options. The boy needed medical attention beyond what she could provide, but taking him to Dr. Sullivan in Agua Clara meant exposing his presence to the town. The nearest Apache encampment was at least 2 days' ride to the north, and she couldn't be certain they were even his people. Different bands moved throughout the territory, some more hostile to settlers than others. As she pondered these problems, Nilchi spoke, his voice stronger than she'd expected. "Elena," he said carefully, testing her name. Then he touched his chest. "Nilchi." Elena smiled despite herself. "Yes, I'm Elena. You're Nilchi." A small moment of connection, but significant. Names were powerful things on the frontier, often the only possession that couldn't be stolen. By confirming his, the boy had offered a fragile thread of trust. After breakfast, Elena checked his wound again. The herbs seemed to be helping. The angry red streaks that had begun to spread from the gash were receding. Still, he would need time to heal before he could walk any distance. "I need to tend to my animals," she told him, pointing outside and then miming feeding creatures. "I'll be right back." Whether he understood or not, Nilchi made no move to follow as she stepped out into the morning air, still fresh and cool from the previous night's storm. The world had been washed clean, droplets clinging to every cactus spine and desert shrub. Elena hurried to the stone shelter where her goats bleated impatiently, eager to be released into the small enclosed paddock where they could graze on the sparse desert vegetation. When she returned to the house, she found Nilchi examining a small wooden carving of a bird that he had taken from her bedside table. He didn't appear startled by her return, merely glanced at her before carefully replacing the carving exactly as he had found it. "That was a gift from my husband," Elena said, though she knew he couldn't understand. Speaking the words aloud felt strange after so many months of silence. His name was Ricardo. Throughout the day, they established a cautious routine. Elena tended to her chores while Nilchi rested, his eyes following her movements. Occasionally, he would point to an object, and she would provide the Spanish or English word. He absorbed each new term with remarkable quickness, repeating it until his pronunciation satisfied him. By evening, he had accumulated a small vocabulary: water, fire, bread, knife, goat, simple words that bridged the vast gulf between their worlds. Elena found herself talking more than she had in years, explaining each task as she performed it, knowing that while he might not grasp her meaning, the sound of a human voice seemed to comfort him. As night fell once more, she noticed him gazing at a small framed daguerreotype on the wall, the only image she had of Ricardo and herself, taken shortly after their wedding. "That was my husband," Elena said softly, touching the image of the smiling man. "Ricardo." She then pointed to the younger version of herself, Elena. Nilchi studied the image, then looked at her questioningly, his gaze lingering on the unmarked face in the picture, then moving to the scar that now marked her cheek. Elena touched her scar, then made a sweeping gesture with her hand, followed by an explosive motion. "Fire," she said simply. "Gone." The boy's expression changed, something like recognition flickering in his eyes. He pointed to himself then, made a similar gesture of separation. "You're lost too, aren't you?" Elena asked. "Separated from your people?" Nilchi pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders, his gaze drifting to the window where darkness had settled completely. In that moment, he looked impossibly young and vulnerable, a child caught between worlds not of his making. Elena allowed him to keep the bed again, and as she settled onto her pallet by the hearth, she realized that for the first time in years, her small home didn't feel empty. The quiet breathing of another person filled the space, reminding her that somewhere, beneath the scar tissue that had grown around her heart, something vital still remained. What she couldn't know was that far to the northwest, an Apache war chief named Naish, known to the whites as Black Knife for the obsidian blade he carried, was gathering warriors to find his missing nephew, and that in 5 more days their paths would converge at her doorstep in a moment that would redefine everything she thought she knew about courage, redemption, and belonging. The second day dawned clear and bright, the desert air scrubbed clean by the storm. Elena had been awake since first light, her sleep disturbed by unfamiliar sounds, the soft breathing of another person, the occasional rustling of blankets as Nilchi shifted in his sleep. She moved quietly about her morning routine, feeding the small fire and setting water to boil for coffee, all the while watching the sleeping child. In just 2 days, he looked remarkably different from the terrified wounded boy she'd rescued from the wolves. The hollowness in his cheeks had filled out with regular meals, and even in sleep, his expression was more peaceful, the hunted look replaced by the innocent vulnerability of childhood. When he finally stirred, opening his eyes to find Elena watching him, he did something that caught her completely off guard. He smiled, a small, hesitant turning of lips that transformed his solemn face and sent an unexpected warmth spreading through Elena's chest. "Good morning, Nilchi," she said, returning his smile with one of her own, feeling the familiar pull of her scar tissue. "Morning, Elena," he replied carefully, the words slightly accented but perfectly understandable. After a simple breakfast, Elena helped Nilchi to the door, so he could sit in the sunshine while she tended to her daily chores. His leg was healing well, but he still couldn't put much weight on it. She showed him how to snap dried beans into a wooden bowl, giving him a task to occupy his hands while he watched her work in the small garden where stubborn vegetables struggled against the harsh desert conditions. As the morning passed, Elena found herself speaking more than she had in months, narrating her activities, partly to help Nilchi learn more words, but also because the silence that had once been her companion now felt oddly empty. "These plants give us food," she explained, kneeling between rows of squash. "These others," she pointed to scraggly weeds encroaching on her carefully tended plot, "we pull out, not food." Nilchi absorbed each new word with remarkable quickness, repeating them until his pronunciation matched hers. By midday, he was stringing together simple phrases. "Elena Garden," he would say, or "Nilchi help soon," pointing to his injured leg with a determined expression that suggested he had no intention of being an idle guest once he could walk properly. The sound of approaching hoofbeats brought Elena's movements to an abrupt halt. Visitors were rare enough to be a concern on any day. With an Apache child under her roof, they represented a potential threat. She quickly moved to Nilchi's side, gesturing for him to remain quiet. "Stay here," she whispered, pointing firmly to the spot where he sat. "Don't make a sound." Whether he understood her specific words or merely her urgent tone, Nilchi nodded, his body instantly alert, his eyes wide but not fearful. Elena retrieved her Winchester from just inside the door and waited, shading her eyes against the midday sun to identify the approaching rider. A solitary figure on horseback emerged from the heat shimmer of the desert, gradually taking shape as he drew nearer. Elena recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette of Sheriff Thomas Sullivan, the law in Agua Clara and surrounding territories. Unlike many officials in these parts, Sullivan had a reputation for fairness, enforcing the law without the casual cruelty or corruption that characterized too many who wore badges on the frontier. Still, his appearance at her isolated homestead was concerning. Elena glanced at Nilchi, considering whether to hide him, but there wasn't time. Instead, she stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of the boy, her rifle held casually, but visibly as the sheriff reined his horse to a stop at her gate. "Miss Cortez," Sullivan called, removing his hat. Despite his imposing size, his voice was surprisingly gentle, his weathered face creased with smile lines around the eyes. "Looks like you weathered the storm all right." "Sheriff," Elena acknowledged. With a nod, "What brings you all the way out here?" Sullivan dismounted, his movements easy despite his large frame. He looped his reins over the gatepost and approached, his sharp eyes taking in the scene, Elena with her rifle, and behind her, partially visible, the small form of Nilchi. "Storm brought down the telegraph lines," he explained. "I'm checking on the outlying homesteads." His gaze settled on Nilchi, his expression revealing nothing. "Seems you've got company." Elena tightened her grip on the rifle, not raising it, but ensuring Sullivan noticed her readiness. "The boy was injured. I'm helping him heal." Sullivan nodded slowly, his eyes still on Nilchi. "Apache," he said, not a question but an observation. "There's been movement north of here. Army patrol came through town yesterday. Captain Reynolds is looking for a hunting party that got separated from the main band during the storm." Elena kept her expression neutral, though her heart began to pound harder against her ribs. "Is that so? They're searching for something," Sullivan continued. "Or someone. Thought you should know." The implication was clear enough. Sullivan wasn't simply delivering news, he was warning her. But why? Did he suspect she was harboring the boy, or was this a general caution given to all homesteaders in the area? "I appreciate the information," Elena said carefully. "Haven't seen any sign of trouble myself." Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if coming to some private decision. "There's talk in town. Mrs. Hollister saw smoke from your chimney during the storm. Said it was burning hotter than a woman living alone would. Need. Elena's grip tightened on her rifle. Martha Hollister was the telegraph operator's wife, a woman whose primary occupation seemed to be cataloging the business of others. Wood was damp from the storm, Elena replied evenly. Had to burn more to dry out the house. That's what I figured, Sullivan said, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Just thought you should know people are talking. People are always talking, Sheriff. Doesn't concern me much what they say. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. No, I don't suppose it does. He settled his hat back on his head and gathered his reins. Well, if you need anything from town, I'll be making a supply run at week's end. It was an offer of assistance, unexpected but not unwelcome. Elena had been running low on several essentials, and with Nilchi to consider, the idea of leaving her home for even a few hours was problematic. I might take you up on that, she said, her tone softening slightly. Thank you. Sullivan nodded, then hesitated. Miss Cortez Elena, he said, using her given name for the first time in their acquaintance. Whatever you're doing, be careful. These are dangerous times for folks who don't fit neatly into one camp or another. Before she could respond, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Elena standing in the yard with the distinct impression that Sheriff Sullivan knew more than he was letting on, and that his warning carried more significance than a simple, neighborly gesture. When she returned to Nilchi's side, she found him sitting upright, his dark eyes fixed on the spot where Sullivan had disappeared into the distance. Friend? He asked, pointing in the direction the sheriff had ridden. Elena considered the question. Was Sullivan a friend? He had certainly behaved like one today, offering warning and assistance rather than demanding she surrender Nilchi to his custody, as would have been his legal duty. Yes, she said finally. Friend, I think. Nilchi nodded, seeming satisfied with her assessment. He pointed to her rifle, then made a shooting gesture. Protect Nilchi? The simple question caught Elena off guard. Yes, she found herself saying, I'll protect you. As the day progressed, Elena couldn't shake the unease Sullivan's visit had stirred within her. If the army was searching for missing Apache, it wouldn't be long before they came to her homestead. She needed to decide what to do with Nilchi before then. The boy seemed to sense her concern, watching her with those perceptive eyes as she moved about her tasks with unusual distraction. At one point, he reached out and touched her hand as she passed, the gesture so unexpected that she stopped and looked down at him in surprise. Elena, worry, he said simply. She sighed, sitting beside him on the small bench outside her door. Yes, I'm worried. People will come looking for you. Some of them might want to hurt you. Though he might not understand every word, he clearly grasped the essence of her concern. He touched his injured leg, then made a walking motion with his fingers. Nilchi go soon. No trouble for Elena. The selfless offer from a child who had every reason to distrust her kind brought a lump to Elena's throat. No, she said firmly. Not until your leg is better. Not until it's safe. As twilight descended over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold, Elena helped Nilchi inside. She prepared a simple meal of beans, dried corn, and the last of her jerked venison, watching as the boy ate with the healthy appetite of youth and healing. After dinner, as she sat in her rocking chair mending a tear in one of her skirts, Nilchi surprised her again. He pointed to her scar, his expression curious but not fearful or disgusted as most people's were when they noticed her disfigurement. Fire? He asked, remembering her earlier explanation. Elena nodded, her hand automatically rising to touch the twisted tissue. Yes, fire. Bad men came to our town. They burned houses. My husband, she stopped, the memory still painful despite the years that had passed. My husband didn't escape. I tried to save him, but the fire was too strong. Nilchi listened intently, his expression solemn. Then he pointed to his own injured leg. Bad men, he said, using a term he must have heard her use. White soldiers. The confirmation of what Elena had suspected settled like a stone in her stomach. Nilchi's wound had come from an encounter with the army. The knowledge left her with a sense of dread. Whatever circumstances had brought him to her doorstep, they were unlikely to be resolved peacefully if Captain Reynolds and his men found him here. As night fell completely, Elena helped Nilchi to her bed, noticing that he limped less than he had the previous day. His resilience was remarkable, his young body healing with the vigor of youth. "Sleep now," she told him, tucking the blanket around his small form. "Tomorrow we'll see if you can put more weight on that leg." Nilchi nodded, but as she turned to move toward her pallet by the hearth, he caught her hand. "Elena," he said seriously, "thank you." The simple phrase, delivered with such earnest dignity, caught her off guard. Elena knelt beside him, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "You're welcome, Nilchi," she replied softly. "We'll find a way to get you home, I promise." What neither of them could know was that 3 days later, that promise would be tested in ways Elena could never have imagined, when 12 Apache warriors materialized from the sunset, led by a war chief determined to reclaim his nephew and offer sacred vows to the woman who had saved him. The 3rd day of Nilchi's stay brought subtle changes to Elena's home. Small adjustments had begun to appear: a makeshift sleeping pallet, constructed from spare blankets and cushions near the hearth, a collection of smooth stones the boy had gathered and arranged in patterns on the windowsill, a crude drawing scratched in the dust beside the door showing 2 figures, one small, one tall, standing together beneath the sun. Each modification signaled a shift from temporary shelter to something approaching home, however brief that home might be. Nilchi's leg had improved remarkably. Though he still favored it when walking, he could now move around the small adobe without assistance, his natural grace returning as pain receded. His vocabulary expanded hourly, each new word adding another bridge between their worlds. By mid-morning, he was following Elena outside, insisting on helping with her daily chores despite her protests. "You rest," Elena said, pointing to the bench in the shade of her porch. "Your leg needs time." Nilchi shook his head stubbornly. "Nilchi help," he replied, his jaw set in a determined line that reminded Elena of the fierce warriors his people were known to produce. "Not lazy boy." The declaration, so earnest and dignified from one so young, brought a smile to Elena's face. "Very well," she conceded, "but nothing too strenuous." She set him to sorting seeds she had collected from her garden, separating those suitable for planting from those best used for cooking. His small fingers worked with surprising dexterity, his concentration absolute as he divided the tiny kernels into neat piles. Elena watched him from the corner of her eye as she tended her goats, struck by how quickly she had adjusted to his presence, how natural it felt to have another person sharing her space and tasks. As the sun climbed higher, Elena noticed Nilchi watching the distant mountains with increasing frequency, his gaze lingering on the northern horizon where rugged peaks rose in jagged silhouette against the cloudless sky. Following his line of sight, she understood. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay his people, his home. "Your family is there?" she asked, pointing toward the mountains. Nilchi nodded, a shadow passing over his young face. "Uncle," he said, touching his chest, then raising his hand high above his head to indicate someone tall and powerful. "Nach." The name sent a ripple of recognition through Elena. Even isolated as she was, she had heard stories of the war chief known to settlers as Black Knife, a brilliant strategist whose raids against military supply convoys had become legendary, yet who somehow avoided the brutal reputation of other Apache leaders. Some said he had studied at a missionary school before returning to his people, that he spoke perfect English and Spanish, and understood the white man's ways better than they did themselves. "Your uncle is Black Knife?" Elena asked, using the name settlers had given him. Nilchi's expression brightened slightly at her recognition. Yes, great warrior. He made a slashing motion with his hand. Many coups. The revelation added new complexity to their situation. If Nilchi was the nephew of such a prominent war chief, his disappearance would not go unnoticed or unpursued. Somewhere out there, Black Knife was likely searching for his missing kin, and Elena had no illusions about the reception she might receive as a white woman found with an Apache child, regardless of her benevolent intentions. "We need to find a way to get you back to him," she said, more to herself than to Nilchi, her mind already turning over possibilities. The nearest Apache territories were at least 2 days' ride north, and venturing there alone would be dangerous. At best, suicidal at worst. Nilchi seemed to understand her dilemma. He touched her arm lightly, drawing her attention back to him. "Nilchi, wait," he said with the simple confidence of youth. "Uncle find, always find." His certainty was both reassuring and unsettling. If Black Knife was indeed searching for his nephew, it was only a matter of time before his path led to Elena's doorstep. What would happen then remained to be seen. As afternoon waned into evening, Elena taught Nilchi to play a simple game of checkers using stones and a grid scratched in the dust. The boy proved a quick study, his tactical mind analyzing patterns and possibilities with impressive speed. By their third game, he was anticipating her moves, his eyes bright with the challenge. "You're going to beat me soon," Elena laughed as he captured another of her pieces. "Tomorrow," Nilchi replied with solemn confidence. "Nilchi win." The casual reference to tomorrow, to a future that extended beyond the immediate moment, caught Elena unexpectedly. For so long, her days had blurred together in solitary sameness, one indistinguishable from the next. Now with Nilchi's presence, time had regained meaning, texture, anticipation. That night, as they sat by the hearth eating a simple meal of rabbit stew, Elena found herself telling tales from her childhood in Sonora, legends her grandmother had passed down, even recounting the adventures of Don Quixote as best. She could remember them from the battered copy Ricardo had loved to read aloud during the long winter evenings of their marriage. Nilchi listened intently, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight, occasionally asking for clarification of a word or concept he didn't understand. When Elena finally ran out of stories, he surprised her by offering one of his own. In halting phrases mixed with graceful gestures that transcended language barriers, he told her an Apache creation story, how Creator had made the first people from clay and breathed life into them, how Coyote had brought both mischief and wisdom to the world, how the stars were the campfires of ancestors watching over their descendants. Elena was entranced, not just by the story itself, but by the transformation in Nilchi as he told it. The hesitant, injured boy disappeared, replaced by a proud heir to a rich cultural tradition, his voice gaining strength and confidence with each word. When he finished, they sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, the vastness of the desert night pressing against the small windows of Elena's home. The moment felt sacred somehow, a bridge spanning not just language but worldviews, histories, futures. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Elena said finally. "It's a beautiful story." Nilchi nodded, accepting her gratitude with dignity beyond his years. "Your story's good too," he offered generously. "Different but good." The simple assessment, different but good, struck Elena as profoundly wise. How much bloodshed might have been avoided if more people on both sides of the conflict could embrace such a perspective. As she prepared her palate for the night, Elena noticed Nilchi watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. When she caught his eye, he spoke with surprising directness. "Elena alone," he stated. "Like Nilchi without people. Why?" The question, innocent yet penetrating, caught her off guard. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to explain her solitary existence to a child from a culture where community was central to identity and survival. "After the fire," she began slowly, touching her scarred cheek. "After my husband died, I couldn't stay in town. People looked at me differently. They were afraid of my scar, of my grief. And she paused, realizing a truth she had never fully articulated even to herself. I was afraid too, afraid to care about anyone again, afraid to lose more than I already had." Nilchi considered. This, his brow furrowed in concentration as he processed both her words and the emotion behind them. "Afraid is not good always," he said finally. "Sometimes, yes, keeps alive. But always afraid," he made a gesture as if something was withering, "makes spirit small." The wisdom in his observation left Elena momentarily speechless. From the mouth of a child had come a truth she had been avoiding for years, that her isolation, while begun as necessary healing, had gradually become a prison of her own making, her spirit indeed growing smaller within its confines. "You're right," she acknowledged softly. "Being always afraid does make the spirit small." Nilchi nodded, satisfied that she had understood his meaning. He yawned widely, the philosophical moment giving way to the simple needs of a tired child. "Sleep now," Elena said, helping him settle into his bed. "Tomorrow is another day." As she lay on her pallet in the dimness, listening to Nilchi's breathing gradually deepen into sleep, Elena found herself contemplating his question and her response with newfound clarity. Had she been existing rather than living these past years? Had her fear of further loss become a self-fulfilling prophecy, ensuring that nothing new could enter her carefully controlled world? The questions followed her into uneasy dreams where she wandered endless desert paths, searching for something unnamed yet essential, always just beyond the next rise or around the next bend. She woke before dawn, the remnants of these dreams, clinging to her consciousness like cobwebs, insubstantial yet persistent. The day that followed brought an unexpected visitor. Elena was teaching Nilchi how to card wool from her small flock of goats when she heard the distinctive sound of an approaching wagon. She tensed immediately, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that leaned against the porch post. "Inside," she told Nilchi quietly. "Stay there until I call you." The boy obeyed without question, limping quickly into the house and closing the door behind him. Elena positioned herself casually on the porch, rifle within easy reach but not in hand, as the wagon came into view. She recognized it immediately, Dr. Jonathan Miller's battered buckboard, pulled by his equally battered mule. The physician was a rarity in these parts, a genuinely educated man who had come west seeking adventure and remained, out of a sense of duty to the scattered communities that had no other medical care. He visited the outlying homesteads once a month, treating everything from childbirth to gunshot wounds with equal pragmatism. "Dr. Miller," Elena called as the wagon drew closer. "This is an unexpected pleasure." The doctor pulled his team to a halt, setting the brake before climbing down with the stiffness of a man who had spent too many hours on hard wagon seats. He was in his 50s, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, now more gray than brown. "Miss Cortez," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. Sheriff Sullivan mentioned you might need some medical supplies." Elena's guard rose immediately. Sullivan had said nothing about sending the doctor her way. Was this a ruse to investigate the rumors about her harboring an Apache child? "That was thoughtful of him," she said carefully, "but I'm well stocked at present." Miller nodded, his shrewd eyes taking in her defensive posture, the rifle within reach, the closed door of her home in the middle of a hot day when it would normally stand open for ventilation. "The sheriff also mentioned you might have a guest," he said quietly. "One who could benefit from medical attention beyond what you can provide." Elena's hand moved closer to the rifle. "Did he now?" Miller sighed, removing his spectacles and cleaning them with a handkerchief, a habitual gesture she had noted during previous visits. "Miss Cortez, Elena, I've been practicing medicine on this frontier for 20 years. I've treated soldiers and settlers, Navajo and Apache, Mexican bandits, and American prospectors. I don't see uniforms or skin color. I see people who need help." He replaced his spectacles, looking at her directly. "Whatever else I am. First a physician. If you have someone inside who needs medical care, I offer it freely, with no questions asked and no reports made to authorities." Elena studied him carefully, weighing his words against her knowledge of the man. In the 3 years she had known him, Dr. Miller had never shown prejudice or political allegiance beyond a commitment to healing. If anyone could be trusted in this situation, perhaps it was he. "Wait here," she said finally, disappearing inside the house. She found Nilchi crouched by the window, peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters. "There's a doctor outside," she explained, kneeling to his level. "A healer. He wants to look at your leg, make sure it's healing properly." Nilchi's expression turned wary. "White doctor?" "Yes, but a good man," Elena assured him. "I trust him. He won't hurt you or tell the soldiers about you." The boy considered this, clearly weighing his own instincts against Elena's assessment. Finally, he nodded. "Nilchi see doctor." Elena led him outside, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder as they approached Dr. Miller, who had retrieved his medical bag from the wagon and now waited patiently on the porch. "Doctor, this is Nilchi," Elena introduced them. "Nilchi. This is Dr. Miller, a healer." Miller crouched down to the boy's level, his manner neither condescending nor overly familiar. "Hello, Nilchi," he said calmly. "I understand you hurt your leg. May I take a look at it?" Nilchi glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. The boy extended his injured leg, watching with intense curiosity as Miller gently unwrapped the bandage. Elena had applied. "Good clean work," the doctor commented, examining the healing wound. "Your stitching has improved since I last saw it, Miss Cortez." "I had a good teacher," Elena replied, acknowledging his past instruction. Miller continued his examination, speaking softly to Nilchi throughout, explaining what he was doing even though he knew the boy might not understand all his words. His touch was gentle, his movements deliberate and careful. "The wound is healing nicely," he concluded, applying a fresh bandage from his own supplies. "No sign of infection. You should be running around again in no time, young man." Nilchi seemed to understand the positive assessment, a small smile breaking across his face. "Thank you," he said carefully in English. Miller's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're welcome," he replied, then added something in what Elena recognized as Apache, though she couldn't understand the words. Nilchi's eyes widened, and he responded rapidly in his native tongue, a torrent of words that made Miller laugh and hold up his hands in surrender. "My Apache is very limited, I'm afraid," the doctor explained to Elena. "I picked up a few phrases treating patients at the reservation. Mostly I just told him he's a brave boy and asked if he was hungry." "And what did he say?" Elena asked, intrigued by this unexpected communication. Miller smiled. "From what I could gather, he said I speak like a frog with stones in its mouth. But my heart is good." Elena couldn't help laughing, and after a moment, Nilchi joined in, the sound of their combined mirth echoing across the quiet desert, a rare and precious harmony. Miller stayed for a simple lunch, sharing news from town and beyond. The telegraph lines had been repaired, bringing word that tensions were rising between the Army and various Apache bands. Captain Reynolds had received reinforcements from Fort Braverman, ostensibly to protect settlers but more likely to increase pressure on the tribes to relocate to the reservations. "There are rumors," Miller said carefully, watching Nilchi playing with a small wooden top he had produced from his bag, "that Black Knife is gathering warriors. Some say he's preparing for war. Others say he's searching for something or someone taken from his band." Elena felt a chill despite the warm day. "What do you believe, doctor?" Miller sighed, removing his spectacles again, a gesture Elena now recognized as his way of buying time to consider his words carefully. I believe that a desperate man searching for family is more dangerous than any warrior seeking conquest, he said finally. And Black Knife is not a man to be underestimated in either capacity. The warning, for that was what it was, hung in the air between them. Miller replaced his spectacles and rose to his feet. I should be on my way. Other patients to see before dark. As he gathered his things and prepared his wagon, he handed Elena a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Additional medical supplies, he explained, just in case. She accepted the gift with gratitude, walking with him to his wagon. As he climbed up to the seat, Miller paused, looking down at her with an expression of genuine concern. Be careful. Elena, the situation is volatile. If Reynolds discovers you're harboring Black Knife's nephew, he left the consequence unspoken. But Elena could fill in the blank easily enough. How did you know? She asked quietly, glancing back to ensure Nilchi was out of earshot. Miller's smile was tinged with sadness. The boy has his uncle's eyes. I treated Black Knife once, years ago, before he became war chief. He'd been shot by a rancher while hunting deer on what had once been Apache land. I never forgot those eyes' pride and pain in equal measure. With that, he flicked the reins and set his mule in motion, the wagon creaking away across the desert, leaving Elena standing in a cloud of dust, the doctor's warning adding new urgency to her already complicated situation. That evening, as a spectacular sunset painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold, Elena sat on her porch with Nilchi beside her, watching as the colors gradually faded into the deeper blue of approaching night. The day's events had left her preoccupied, her mind turning over possibilities and dangers like stones in a riverbed. You think hard, Nilchi observed, breaking into her thoughts. Worry more, Elena smiled despite herself. In just a few days, the boy had become remarkably attuned to her moods, reading her expressions with uncanny accuracy. Yes, she admitted. I'm worried about what happens next. About how to get you safely back to your people. Nilchi considered this, his small face solemn in the fading light. Uncle comes, he said with that same unwavering certainty he had expressed before. Soon. And when he does? Elena asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Miller's visit. What then, Nilchi? Will he see a friend who helped his nephew? Or just another white settler to fight against? The boy seemed to understand the gravity of her question. He was quiet for a long moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Uncle Wise, he said finally, sees truth, not just skin. He touched her hand lightly. Elena saved Nilchi. Uncle will know. His confidence was touching, but Elena wasn't so sure. In a conflict marked by atrocities on both sides, trust was as rare as water in the desert. Even if Black Knife recognized her good intentions, would it matter against the larger backdrop of struggle between his people and hers? As if sensing her continued doubt, Nilchi added something that caught her completely off guard. Maybe Elena come with Nilchi, he suggested, his expression brightening. At the idea, live with people. Teach words like teach Nilchi. The innocent proposal struck Elena to her core. Leave everything she had built here, her home, her independence, the life she had painstakingly constructed from the ashes of tragedy, to follow this child into an unknown future among people who might well reject her on sight. It was absurd, impossible, dangerous. And yet, as the stars multiplied overhead and the desert night enfolded them in its vast silence, Elena found herself unable to dismiss the idea entirely. What was truly holding her here? A homestead built on solitude and grief? A future mapped out in endless, identical days? I don't think it's that simple, Nilchi, she said gently. Your people have good reason not to trust someone like me. Not someone like you, the boy countered with surprising eloquence. You, Elena, who saved Nilchi from wolves, who heals leg, who teaches words and stories. He touched her scarred cheek with gentle fingers. Who understands pain? The simple assessment brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to distress the child. We'll see what happens when your uncle comes, she said, neither accepting nor rejecting his suggestion. For now, let's enjoy the stars. They're particularly beautiful tonight. Nilchi seemed satisfied with this non-answer, tilting his head back to gaze at the magnificent celestial display above them. After a moment, he pointed to a specific pattern of stars. Those are the 7 sisters, he said in his own language, then repeated it in English for her benefit. Sacred stars. Show when to plant, when to move camp, very old. Elena recognized the Pleiades cluster, known by different names in cultures throughout the world, yet universally significant. My grandmother called them La Siete Cabrillas. She told him. The 7 little goats. She said they watched over shepherds and their flocks. Same stars, different stories, Nilchi observed with that preternatural wisdom that continued to surprise her. Still beautiful. Yes, Elena agreed, her gaze shifting from the heavens to the child beside her, his profile limned in starlight. Still beautiful. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened around them, each lost in private thoughts, yet somehow connected in a way Elena had not experienced since Ricardo's death. For the first time in years, she felt not just alive but awake, present to possibilities beyond mere survival. What she couldn't know was that less than 2 days later, those possibilities would crystallize into choices she could never have anticipated when 12 Apache warriors appeared at sunset, led by a war chief carrying not just weapons of war, but sacred vows of an entirely different nature. The 5th day dawned with an unsettling stillness. No breeze stirred the desert scrub, no birds called from the scattered mesquite trees, and even Elena's goats seemed subdued, huddling together in their pen rather than scattering to graze, as was their usual habit. The air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm, though the sky remained clear and relentlessly blue. Elena woke with a sense of foreboding that she couldn't explain. Something had shifted during the night, some subtle reordering of the world that raised the fine hairs on her arms and sent her reaching for her rifle before her feet touched the floor. She found Nilchi already awake, sitting cross-legged on his sleeping pallet, his dark eyes fixed on the eastern window where dawnlight streamed in golden rays. "Uncle comes today," he said without turning, his voice calm and certain. Elena paused, in the act of checking her rifle. "How do you know?" Nilchi glanced at her briefly, then returned his gaze to the window. "Dreamed him, on black horse with white star. 12 warriors behind, coming when sun touches mountains." He touched his chest. "Feel here, today." Elena had learned enough about Apache culture to know they placed great significance on dreams, believing them to be messages from the spirit world. Whether his conviction came from such a source or simply a child's longing for family, the certainty in Nilchi's voice was impossible to dismiss. "Then we should prepare," she said, accepting his prediction without further question. "Your leg is much better. Can you show me how your people would welcome a war chief? I don't want to make mistakes if he truly comes today." Nilchi's face brightened at her acceptance and willingness to learn. He rose smoothly, his injured leg now supporting his weight with only the slightest hesitation, and began to explain the complex protocols of Apache formal greeting. Throughout the morning, he demonstrated proper gestures, taught Elena key phrases in his language, and explained the significance of various symbols and behaviors. "Never look in eyes first," he instructed seriously. "Wait for chief to speak. Women stand behind men usually, but you different. You save Nilchi, so you stand beside." Elena absorbed these lessons attentively, practicing the phrases until Nilchi declared her pronunciation not too bad for white tongue. The activity served another purpose beyond preparation. It kept them both occupied, preventing anxiety from building as the day progressed toward the predicted encounter. By midday, they had completed what preparations they could. Elena had prepared a simple meal that could be offered to guests, a stew of rabbit and desert herbs, cornbread baked in the outdoor oven, and her precious store of honey diluted with water to make a sweet drink. Nilce had arranged small symbolic offerings at the 4 cardinal points around her homestead. Eagle feathers he'd found in her small collection of treasures, turquoise beads from a broken necklace, a perfectly round stone from the arroyo, and a carved wooden figure of a horse that had belonged to Ricardo. Protection, he explained when she questioned the arrangements. Show respect for spirits, ask for good words between people. As the afternoon waned, Elena found herself growing increasingly tense. She checked and rechecked her supplies, rearranged the furniture in her small home, and repeatedly scanned the horizon for approaching riders. Nilce, by contrast, seemed to grow calmer with each passing hour, his movements becoming more deliberate, his expression settling into dignified anticipation. "Are you not afraid?" Elena asked finally, pausing in her nervous arrangements to study the boy. "After all this time away from your people, after being wounded, hunted by wolves, dependent on a stranger, are you not afraid of what comes next?" Nilce considered her question seriously, his young face solemn in the slanting afternoon light. "Afraid before," he admitted. "When leg hurt, when wolves come, when not know if Elena friend or enemy." He touched his chest. "Not afraid now. Going home. Uncle comes. Elena safe." The simple confidence in his last statement caught her off guard. "How can you be so sure I'll be safe, Nilce? Your people have every reason to distrust someone like me." "Not someone like you," he corrected, echoing his words from the previous evening. "You, Elena, who saves, who heals, who shares food and stories." He paused, searching for the right words in his limited English. "Uncle sees truth. Always." Elena wished she could share his certainty. As the sun began its final descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across her small homestead, she changed into her cleanest dress, combed her hair into a neat braid, and took a moment to study her reflection in the small mirror by her bed. The scar that divided her face seemed especially prominent today, a physical manifestation of the boundary she stood upon between cultures, between past and future, between fear and possibility. Nilce appeared at her side, his own hair freshly washed and carefully arranged, his face bearing symbols he had painted himself using pigments ground from colored stones and mixed with goat fat. He studied her reflection beside his own, then reached up and touched her scar with gentle fingers. "Marks of warrior," he said simply, "shows strength." Before Elena could respond, Nilce's head snapped up, his entire body tensing like a desert creature sensing predators. "They come," he whispered, his eyes widening. "Listen." At first, Elena heard nothing beyond the familiar sounds of her homestead, the bleating of goats, the wind rustling through dried grass, the distant cry of a hunting hawk. Then it reached her, the faint but unmistakable rhythm of approaching horses moving at a measured pace across the desert floor. Nilce moved to the door, his previous calm now illuminated with barely contained excitement. Elena followed more slowly, her heart thundering against her ribs, her mouth suddenly dry with apprehension. Together, they stepped onto the porch and faced the eastern horizon, where dust clouds had appeared, resolving gradually into the forms of mounted warriors. "Uncle," Nilce breathed, his small body virtually vibrating with anticipation as he recognized the lead rider. Elena placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, as much to anchor herself as to restrain him. "Wait," she cautioned. "Remember what you taught me. There are protocols to follow." The approaching riders gradually took clearer form 12 warriors mounted on desert-hardened horses, their faces painted with symbols of power and protection, feathers and turquoise, adorning their hair and clothing. They rode in a disciplined formation that spoke of both military precision and ceremonial significance. At their center, mounted on a magnificent black stallion with a distinctive white star on its forehead, just as Nilchi had described from his dream, rode a figure whose presence dominated the entire company. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking the war chief known as Black Knife. He sat taller than those who flanked him, his bearing regal and commanding. A full headdress of eagle feathers crowned his head, and across his chest he wore a breastplate of polished bone and silver that caught the late afternoon sunlight with every movement of his horse. When they were perhaps 100 yards from her homestead, Black Knife raised his hand, and the entire company halted in perfect unison. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the soft snorting of horses and the whisper of wind across the desert. Nilchi looked up at Elena, his expression silently asking permission. She nodded slightly, releasing his shoulder. The boy stepped forward, moving with deliberate dignity despite his slight limp, positioning himself halfway between Elena's porch and the mounted warriors. He raised his right hand, palm forward, and called out in Apache a formal greeting that Elena had practiced with him that morning, but knew she could never pronounce with his natural fluency. The effect on the warriors was immediate. A ripple of movement passed through their ranks as they recognized the child standing before them. Black Knife himself straightened in his saddle, his posture shifting subtly from military readiness to something more personal, more vulnerable. He dismounted in a fluid motion that belied his imposing size, handing his reins to the warrior beside him without taking his eyes from Nilchi. He approached alone, his steps measured and deliberate, until he stood perhaps 10 paces from the boy. Father and nephew regarded each other across this small distance, neither speaking nor moving for what felt to Elena like an eternity. Then Black Knife spoke, a single word that needed no translation, filled with all the relief and love of an uncle who had feared his sister's child was lost forever. Nilchi. The formality dissolved as Nilchi rushed forward into his uncle's arms. Black Knife knelt, gathering the boy against his chest in an embrace that transcended cultural differences and political tensions. The warriors behind him remained impassive, maintaining their vigilant watch, but the profound emotion of the reunion was unmistakable. Elena remained on her porch, unwilling to intrude on this sacred moment between family members. She watched as Black Knife held his nephew at arm's length, examining him carefully, his gaze lingering on the healing wound on his leg. Nilchi spoke rapidly in Apache, his hands moving in expressive gestures as he apparently recounted his experiences. Repeatedly, he pointed toward Elena, and each time, Black Knife's gaze would shift to her, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. She stood her ground, remembering Nilchi's instruction not to approach until invited, her hands carefully visible at her sides to show she carried no weapons. Finally, Black Knife rose to his full height, one hand resting on Nilchi's shoulder, and addressed her directly in perfect, unaccented English. "You are Elena Cortez." It wasn't a question, but Elena nodded, finding her voice despite the dryness in her throat. "I am. My nephew tells me you saved him from wolves, tended his wounds, and sheltered him from those who would do him harm." Black Knife's voice was deep and resonant, his diction reflecting an education that surprised Elena despite what she had heard about his background. "He needed help," Elena replied simply. "Any decent person would have done the same." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, crossed Black Knife's stern features. "We both know that is not true. Many would have turned him away or surrendered him to the bluecoats for reward or favor." He studied her face with renewed interest, his gaze lingering briefly on her scar. "You have known suffering," he observed. "Yet you chose compassion over safety." Before Elena could respond, Nilchi tugged at his uncle's hand, speaking rapidly in Apache and gesturing toward the small homestead. Black Knife listened attentively, then nodded. "My nephew wishes me to see where he has lived these past days," he explained to Elena, "and to taste the food you have prepared for our arrival." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "He says you have been practicing our greeting custom since dawn." Elena felt a flush of embarrassment rise to her cheeks. "I wanted to show proper respect," she admitted. "An uncommon courtesy in these times," Black Knife acknowledged. He turned and spoke to his warriors in Apache. Most of the group wheeled their horses and moved to establish a perimeter around the homestead, while two dismounted and approached, flanking their chief as he walked toward Elena's porch. As they drew nearer, Elena was struck by Black Knife's appearance. He was taller than she had first estimated, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of a lifetime warrior. His face was handsome in a severe way, high cheekbones and a strong jaw framing eyes of such intense darkness they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The years had left their mark in lines around those eyes and strands of silver, inclusive left their fins of Sylvie, is had left their mark in lines around those eyes and strands of silver in his long black hair, but they had taken nothing of his vitality or presence. Up close, she could see that what she had taken for a breastplate was actually a complex garment of leather adorned with intricate beadwork, bone hairpipes, and silver concos. At his waist hung a knife with a handle of polished obsidian, the Black Knife that had given rise to his settler name. "Elena Cortez," he said formally. "I have come to reclaim my nephew and to honor the debt I owe for his life." Elena shook her head slightly. "There is no debt, Chief Black Knife. I acted from conscience, not expectation of reward." "Nevertheless," he replied, "among my people, a life saved creates a sacred obligation, one that cannot be ignored without dishonoring both giver and receiver." The two warriors who had accompanied him stepped forward, each carrying items wrapped in tanned hide. At a nod from Black Knife, they unwrapped their bundles. One contained a magnificent blanket woven in complex patterns of red, black, and white, its craftsmanship finer than any textile Elena had ever seen. The other revealed a necklace of turquoise and silver, each stone hand-polished and set in intricate silverwork that spoke of exceptional skill. "These are gifts of gratitude," Black Knife explained, "though they cannot truly repay what you have done." Elena was overwhelmed by the generosity of the offerings, knowing the value such items held, both materially and culturally. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely, "but far too generous for simply doing what was right." Black Knife considered her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "My nephew tells me you live alone, that you lost your husband to fire and violence, that you have carved a life from this harsh land through your own strength and skill." He gestured to the modest homestead around them. "He says you have been kind and patient, that you taught him your words while learning some of his, that you played games and told stories and treated him as family rather than enemy." Nilchi nodded vigorously at this recounting, clearly proud that his uncle understood all he had experienced. "These are not small things, Elena Cortez," Black Knife continued, "especially in times when blood flows too freely between our peoples." He turned and spoke briefly to his warriors, who returned to their horses, leaving the chief alone with Elena and Nilchi. The boy looked between them, his expression hopeful in a way that Elena couldn't quite interpret. "I have considered how best to honor the debt I owe you," Black Knife said, returning his attention to Elena. "Gold and silver are fleeting. Blankets and jewelry, though valuable, do not provide lasting security for a woman alone in dangerous lands." His few possessions were arranged neatly beside him, the small wooden top Dr. Miller had given him, a pouch of colored stones he had collected, a leather cord Elena had taught him to braid. The sight of these humble treasures, so precious to a child who had arrived with nothing, tightened something in Elena's chest. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice still rough with sleep. Nilchi looked up, his face brightening. "Morning, Elena. Uncle comes soon." He tilted his head, studying her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond surfaces. "You decide?" had she? Elena rose from the chair, stretching muscles stiff from her uncomfortable night's rest. Throughout the dark hours, her mind had circled the question from every angle, weighing fears against hopes, practical concerns against deeper yearnings. "I'm still thinking," she told him, moving to stoke the fire and put water on to boil. "There's time yet before your uncle arrives." Nilchi accepted this with a nod, though his expression suggested he believed the matter simpler than she was making it. He helped her prepare a breakfast of cornmeal porridge, sweetened with the last of her honey, moving about the small space with the ease of familiarity, anticipating her needs with small gestures that spoke of their brief but intense shared domesticity. As they ate, Elena found herself memorizing details, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the serious furrow that appeared between his brows when he concentrated, the rare but transformative quality of his smile. Whatever decision she made today, these moments belonged to her, precious gems of connection she would carry forward. "Nilchi," she said finally, setting aside her empty bowl, "what do you think I should do?" The boy looked surprised at being asked, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, considering her question with the gravity it deserved. "Elena should follow heart," he said finally. "Not afraid thoughts." "Afraid thoughts?" He tapped his temple. "Here, mind makes big shadows from small fears. Like sunset makes small bush look like tall man." He moved his hand to his chest. "But here, heart knows true path, like stars know way across sky." The simple wisdom in his words struck Elena deeply. She had indeed been listening primarily to her fears' practical concerns about cultural differences, worries about acceptance among the Apache, anxiety about leaving the security of her homestead, however lonely it might be. But what did her heart say when she silenced those fear shadows? Before she could pursue this line of thought, Nilchi's head lifted sharply, his body tensing with anticipation rather than alarm. "Uncle comes," he announced, rising from his seat and moving to the door. Elena followed more slowly, her heart suddenly racing. Through the open doorway, she could see Black Knife approaching alone, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. He wore simpler attire today, buckskin leggings and a cotton shirt of settler design beneath a traditional vest, adorned with minimal beadwork. His long hair was tied back with a leather thong, and he carried no visible weapons. This deliberate choice of appearance, blending elements of both cultures while emphasizing the man rather than the warrior, was not lost on Elena. Nilchi ran to meet his uncle, but rather than the exuberant greeting of the previous day, their interaction now was more measured, almost ceremonial. Black Knife placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, speaking briefly in Apache. Nilchi nodded seriously, then turned to look back at Elena with an expression of solemn anticipation. Black Knife approached the porch where Elena stood, his steps unhurried but purposeful. He stopped at the base of the two wooden steps, maintaining a respectful distance that placed them at eye level with each other. "Elena Cortez," he greeted her formally. "The sun finds you well this morning?" "It does," she replied, following the traditional exchange Nilchi had taught her. "And yourself?" "I am well." A brief silence followed before Black Knife continued, his direct gaze never wavering from hers. "You have considered my proposal?" Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I have many questions first, if you'll permit them." Black Knife nodded, a flicker of what might have been approval crossing his face. "Ask what you must. Truth between us now will prevent misunderstanding later." "If I were to accept," Elena began carefully, "what would my life be among your people? Would I be expected to abandon all my own ways? Would I be treated as an outsider, tolerated only because of your position?" "Fair questions," Black Knife acknowledged. "You would join my household as wife, with the respect that position commands. Some would welcome you immediately, seeing in our union a bridge between worlds. Others would be cautious, perhaps even hostile at first, until your actions proved your character. His expression softened slightly. As for your ways, I would not ask you to erase yourself, Elena. The woman who saved my nephew is the woman I seek to honor. Changing you would dishonor both of us. He gestured to her homestead. You have skills valuable to my people, your healing knowledge, your ability to grow food in difficult conditions, your crafting of leather and weaving. These would earn respect in their own right. Elena considered his words, appreciating his honesty about the challenges she would face. And what of the larger conflict between our peoples? The army continues to pressure the Apache to surrender their lands. What happens when they discover a white woman living among you? A shadow passed over Black Knife's features. The conflict will continue regardless of your choice today. As for the army's reaction, he shrugged slightly, they already consider me a troublemaker for refusing to lead my people onto the reservation. Having a white wife might confuse them temporarily, but it will not change their ultimate goals. His directness was both refreshing and sobering. He offered no false assurances, no romantic illusions about the difficulties that lay ahead. And Nilchi? Elena asked, her gaze moving to the boy who watched them with barely contained anticipation. What would be my place in his life? At this, Black Knife's stern expression warmed perceptibly. You would be his mother in all ways that matter. His own mother, my sister, was taken by fever 2 winters past. Since then, he has been raised by the women of our band, all caring for him, but none replacing what was lost. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. He has already claimed you in his heart, Elena. I see it in how he looks at you, how he speaks your name. The simple observation touched something deep within Elena, motherhood. The dream she had buried alongside her stillborn child years ago. The possibility she had forced herself to abandon after Ricardo's death. Now it was being offered again. Not with an infant she would shape from birth, but with a remarkable boy she had already come to love. One last question, Elena said, her voice steadier now as clarity began to emerge from her confusion. Why me, truly? There must be women among your own people, women of appropriate status and background, who would make a more suitable wife for a war chief. Black Knife considered her question thoughtfully. There are such women, he acknowledged. Women of beauty and accomplishment, with bloodlines that would strengthen alliances between bands. He took a step closer, his voice dropping slightly though his words remained clear. But none who have walked between worlds as I have. None who understand what it means to belong nowhere completely and everywhere partially. He gestured to her scarred face with a respect that contained no pity. You carry your history visibly, as I carry mine in ways less apparent, but equally indelible. We are both shaped by fire, Elena Cortez tempered rather than destroyed by it. His words resonated with unexpected truth. For all their obvious differences, they shared a fundamental experience of existing at the boundaries, neither fully accepted nor entirely rejected by the worlds they navigated. I still don't know if I can be what your people need in a chief's wife, Elena admitted. I am not asking you to be what my people need. Black Knife replied with surprising gentleness. I am asking you to be who you already are, a woman of courage and compassion, of strength and wisdom. The rest will follow in its own time. Elena took a deep breath, feeling a profound shift within herself, fear giving way not to certainty, but to something more valuable, possibility. Nilchi had been right about the difference between afraid thoughts and heart-knowing. Yes, she said simply. Black Knife's eyes widened slightly, the only indication of surprise in his otherwise composed features. Yes? Yes, I will accept your proposal. I will become your wife according to the customs of your people. A smile transformed Black Knife's severe countenance, revealing a warmth she had only glimpsed in his interactions with Nilchi. Before he could respond, a whoop of joy erupted from the boy, who had been containing his excitement with admirable restraint until this moment. He rushed forward, throwing his arms around Elena's waist with such enthusiasm that she nearly lost her balance. "Elena comes! Elena becomes mother!" he exclaimed, looking up at her with radiant happiness. Heart knew already. Black Knife watched them, his expression softening further. The boy speaks truth. The heart often knows what the mind struggles to accept. He extended his hand to Elena in a gesture that bridged their cultural differences. "Welcome to a new path, Elena Cortez." She took his offered hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip, a warrior's hand capable of both protection and tenderness. Something passed between them in that simple contact, an acknowledgement of the journey they were beginning together, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. "What happens now?" Elena asked, suddenly aware of how little she knew about Apache. "Marriage customs. Now we prepare," Black Knife replied. "A chief's marriage requires certain rituals and celebrations. We will return to our people, who are camped 3 days' ride from here. There will be time for you to gather what possessions you wish to bring, to settle your affairs in this place." Elena glanced around at the homestead she had built, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. This small adobe house had been both refuge and prison, a place of healing and of hiding. Leaving it meant abandoning security, but also embracing life. "I don't need much time," she decided. "Just enough to gather essential items and release my animals." She looked down at Nilchi, who still clung to her side. "And to pack a certain boy's treasures, of course." Black Knife nodded approvingly. "My warriors will assist with whatever you need. By midday, we can begin our journey." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Elena packed carefully, selecting items of practical value and personal significance, her medical supplies and herb collection, Ricardo's hunting knife and the small wooden bird he had carved for her, a locket containing a snippet of her mother's hair, the blanket and turquoise necklace Black Knife had given her. Everything else, furniture, cookware, tools, she left behind. They were just things, replaceable and ultimately insignificant compared to the new life awaiting her. Her goats presented a more difficult decision. Elena had raised them from kids, and they provided milk, meat, and wool that sustained her isolated existence. After consideration, she decided to leave them with her closest neighbor, an elderly Mexican farmer who lived several miles to the south. 2 of Black Knife's warriors escorted her to the man's humble rancho, where she explained her situation in carefully edited terms, offering the goats as a gift rather than revealing her true destination. By midday, as promised, they were ready to depart. Elena stood on her porch one final time, gazing at the small homestead that had sheltered her through years of grief and healing. The adobe walls glowed golden in the sunlight. The small garden she had coaxed from reluctant soil lay neat and orderly. The porch where she had spent countless evenings watching the desert sunset stood empty now, awaiting new inhabitants or the slow reclamation of the elements. "Are you having second thoughts?" Black Knife asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. Elena shook her head. "Not second thoughts, just acknowledgement. This place kept me alive when I wasn't sure. I wanted to be. It deserves a proper goodbye." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The Apache believe that places hold memories, that the earth remembers those who treat it with respect. "This land will not forget you, Elena." "Nor I it," she replied softly. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned away from the past and toward the future that awaited. "I'm ready." Black Knife had provided a horse for her, a sturdy mare with a gentle eye and sure footing, already laden with her few possessions. Nilchi would ride with one of the warriors until his leg was fully healed, though he insisted he could manage his own mount. Elena suspected his uncle's decision had less to do with the boy's injury and more with ensuring he didn't tire during the long journey ahead. As they set out, the 12 warriors arranged themselves in a protective formation around Elena, Black Knife, and Nilchi. The war chief rode beside her, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape and explaining their significance in Apache culture. A particular rock formation where his ancestors had performed important ceremonies, a spring known for its healing properties, a stand of trees where certain medicinal plants could be found. Nilchi frequently called out to her from his position ahead, pointing out desert creatures are interesting. Rock formations with the exuberance of a child showing a beloved adult his favorite things. His excitement was infectious, helping to ease the lingering melancholy of departure. By late afternoon, they had traveled farther north than Elena had ventured in years. The terrain gradually changed, rocky desert giving way to grasslands dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, carrying scents of sage and cedar that refreshed the spirit. As twilight approached, Black Knife led them to a sheltered canyon where a small stream provided fresh water. The warriors established camp with practiced efficiency, some setting up brush shelters, others gathering firewood, still others attending to the horses. Elena was struck by the orderly nature of their cooperation, each person knowing their role without need for instruction. Nilchi stayed close to her side, proudly explaining Apache camping customs and occasionally translating when the warriors spoke among themselves. Elena noticed that several of the men watched her with undisguised curiosity, though none approached directly or showed any hostility. "They're trying to understand," Black Knife explained when he noticed her awareness of their scrutiny. "Most have never spoken with a white woman except across barriers of fear or commerce. Your presence as my future wife challenges everything they have experienced. Will it always be this way?" Elena asked, helping to arrange her sleeping area beneath a brush shelter the warriors had constructed for her. "No," he replied confidently. "Actions speak louder than appearance among my people. They will judge you by what you do, not where you came from." He gestured to a warrior who was expertly skinning rabbits for the evening meal. Yellow Hawk there lost his daughter to army soldiers during a raid 2 seasons ago. He has more reason than most to distrust your kind. Yet he was the first to volunteer for this mission when I announced my intention to find Nilchi. Elena studied the man Black Knife had indicated middle-aged, with a face marked by both hardship and humor, his hands moving with the skilled precision of a lifetime hunter. "Why would he volunteer, knowing you might bring back someone like me?" Black Knife's expression softened. "Because he trusts my judgment, and because he knows that hatred is a fire that eventually consumes the one who carries it." He paused, watching as Nilchi approached Yellow Hawk, speaking animatedly while the older man nodded with apparent interest. "Look at them now. The boy bridges worlds without even trying. Perhaps we adults could learn from his example." The evening meal was a communal affair, everyone gathering around the central fire as night descended. Elena found herself included in the circle, positioned between Black Knife and Nilchi. Though she understood little of the conversation flowing around her, the rhythms and tones conveyed camaraderie and occasional humor rather than tension. After eating, an older warrior produced a small drum, beginning a gentle rhythm that soon had others humming or singing quietly. Black Knife translated snippets for Elena stories of legendary hunts, homages to ancestral heroes, prayers for safe journeys and bountiful seasons ahead. "Music speaks when words fail," he told her as the drumming continued under a star-filled sky. "These songs have been passed down for generations, connecting us to those who walked this land before and those who will come after." As the night deepened and people began retiring to their sleeping places, Black Knife walked Elena to her shelter. "Tomorrow we will travel further into Apache territory," he said. "The land grows more beautiful but also more dangerous, not from my people, but from army patrols who consider any Apache band away from the reservation to be hostile." "I understand," Elena replied, appreciating his frankness about the risks ahead. He hesitated, then spoke more personally than he had since their morning conversation. I want you to know that until the proper marriage ceremonies are performed, you are under my protection, but not under any obligation. If at any point during our journey you reconsider your decision, you need only say so." The unexpected assurance touched Elena deeply. In offering her this freedom, Black Knife demonstrated a respect for her autonomy that contrasted sharply with the controlling behaviors she had witnessed in many settler marriages. "Thank you," she said simply, "but my decision is made." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Rest well, Elena Cortez. Tomorrow brings us closer to your new home." As Black Knife returned to the main fire where several warriors still sat in quiet conversation, Elena entered her shelter. She found Nilchi already there, arranging his small collection of treasures beside the sleeping pallet, prepared for her. "Nilchi," she said gently, "shouldn't you be sleeping with the warriors?" The boy looked up, his expression indicating he found her question puzzling. "Sleep here, with new mother," he stated as if this were obvious, "until proper ceremony. Then sleep in family lodge with uncle and Elena." His matter-of-fact explanation of Apache customs regarding soon-to-be family members was both touching and illuminating. Already she was being integrated into tribal practices, her role as Nilchi's future mother recognized before any formal ceremony. "I see," Elena said, sitting beside him on the pallet. "Well, I'm glad for your company." Nilchi beamed clearly, pleased that she understood the importance of this arrangement. He settled beside her, his small body relaxed with the absolute trust of a child who feels safe and valued. "Tomorrow see mountains where people live," he told her sleepily. "Many trees, good water, horses run free." His eyes began to drift closed despite his efforts to continue describing the wonders that awaited. Elena like new home. Within moments he was asleep, his breathing deep and even one hand curled trustingly around her finger. Elena watched him in the dim light filtering through the brush shelter, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than a week ago, she had been a solitary widow, existing rather than living in her isolated homestead. Now she was traveling toward an unknown future as the promised wife of an Apache war chief and the mother-to-be of his remarkable nephew. The changes were breathtaking in their scope and speed, yet somehow they felt right, as if she were finally aligning with a path that had been waiting for her all along. There would be challenges ahead, cultural barriers to navigate, prejudices to overcome on both sides. But looking at Nilchi's peaceful face, feeling the weight of his trust in her, Elena knew with bone-deep certainty that she had made the right choice. Outside, the warrior's drum had fallen silent, replaced by the natural music of the desert night, the whisper of wind through juniper branches, the distant call of a hunting owl, the soft nickering of horses settling for the night. These sounds, once alien, would become the backdrop of her new life, as familiar eventually as the creaking of her adobe home in the desert heat had been. Elena lay down beside Nilchi, careful not to disturb his sleep. Tomorrow they would continue their journey toward the Apache stronghold in the mountains, drawing closer to the ceremony that would formalize her new role and identity. But in many ways, the true transformation had already occurred, not through ritual or public declaration, but in the private chambers of her heart, where fear had given way to courage and isolation had yielded to connection. As sleep claimed her beneath unfamiliar stars, Elena's last conscious thought was of the wolves that had threatened Nilchi on that stormy night, how what had begun as desperate danger had ultimately led to unexpected salvation for them both. Life's path rarely ran straight or predictable, but sometimes its most treacherous turns led to vistas of previously unimagined beauty. In the days ahead, as they traveled deeper into Apache territory, this truth would reveal itself in ever more profound ways, challenging Elena's preconceptions, expanding her understanding, and ultimately revealing that the greatest journey was not across the physical landscape, but across the boundaries that separated one human heart from another. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.